Thank you for joining me for another video. If you remember, the last couple of weeks we have been discussing Cain and Abel, which is really sort of an exciting little story that takes up less than a chapter of the book of Genesis. And I personally think that we really honestly have everything in this story that really sums up all of human history, and it ends up showing us the way out, showing us a way to get better at life. So we talked about, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the offerings that Cain and Abel brought to God, how Cain's was rejected and Abel's was accepted. God's advice to Cain was, hey, you need to get a hold on your temper. Then last week we saw what happened when Cain lost his temper, and it resulted in the accidental killing of his brother Abel, which I'm sure, this is just me, as a 21st century man, knowing how I would feel if I had just murdered my sisters, or not murder, but if I had just killed my sisters, or one of them even, I would be devastated. So I imagine that Cain was devastated after he accidentally killed his brother. At least according to one tradition, it was accidental. According to a few others, he was intentionally murdering him. I disagree with the intentional murder traditions, because honestly there's no motive. So you're going to just take him out to the field and kill him for what? Because you are jealous that God accepted his offering and not yours? That's not a good reason for murder. You just say, you make something up. Oh, God didn't know what he was talking about. You make something up. Or you do what God said to do and just get better. Just do better next time. That's all God asked. Do better. Then Cain didn't, and his temper flared, and he killed his brother, unfortunately. But many of you, I say many of you, I include myself in that, because there was a time when I didn't even realize this about it, don't realize that the story keeps going. Cain is not just banished, to forever wander the earth, and then he's never redeemed. He's never, how do you say it? He never gets, this resolution of it. He never comes back from it. No, that actually happens, and it happens in what we're going to read this week. It's an ending to the story that I think will probably surprise some of you, many of you, I suspect, probably in the same way that it surprised me. I read it and was just like, man, you have got to be kidding me. This guy, he just keeps coming back, man. So, that being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. Right, so we are in Genesis chapter 4. We're going to begin in verse 17. And we're going to read down to verse 22. You're going to notice something very quickly when we get into verse 18 through 22. You're going to notice something very quickly, and you're going to be like, well, I wonder why it's doing this. And I'll explain why. So verse 17 begins, وَيَدَعْ قَيْنْ أَتْ إِشْتَوْ, and Cain, he knew his wife. Again, we're talking, he knew her carnally. I took my hand off of the book and now I can't find my spot. There we go. وَتَهَرْبَتَ لَدْ Hanoch, and she conceived and she bore Hanoch. I think English translations or the English pronunciation of that name is Enoch, in at least in most American forms of English. I don't know about other forms of English, but Hanoch is the Hebrew, and so we're going to stick with that one, because frankly, saying Enoch just sounds strange from my perspective. Sounds foreign. That's a good way to say it. Wahi ben Bonneir, and he became and he built a city. Wayikra Shem Ha'ir Kashem ben Hanoch. Now there are two possible translations here, and I'm only going to give you one. I'm going to give you the more traditional one right here, and then later on I'm going to explain the second translation of it. So this translation, the first one, the more traditional one, is that Cain built this city, and he called its name, and he called the name of the city like the name of his son Hanoch. We'll get into that discussion here in a bit. Verse 18. ويولد لحنوخ إث عيراد وعيراد يلاد إث محويائل ومحيائل يلاد إث مثوشائل ومثوشائل يلاد إث لامech. I hope you caught what was going on there in verse 18. So it tells us here that to Hanoch was born Irad, his son Irad, and Irad fathered Mehuyael, and Mehuyael goes on to father Methushael. Methushael goes on to father Lamech. Right, so there are so many powers that are guaranteed. You know, you can't hide anything from the camera. There are a couple of different pronunciations of two of these names that are actually in the passage that I'm reading today, so that's why I kind of paused. So in this case, Mehuyael is also called Machiyael. There's no real difference in meaning. They both mean that that God makes someone alive. I'm not sure, if there's an English term for that, to make someone alive. So we'll just say it that way. God makes people alive. He enlivens them, if that's a word. We'll go with that. We're going to pretend enliven is a word. It's the opposite of unliven, apparently. Where was I? Oh, and the other one, that there are two pronunciations of his name in this portion that I'm reading today, is Lamech. In one case he's Lamech, in the other he's Lamech. No difference in meaning. وَيِقَحْ لَو Lamech, and Lamech took to himself shte nashim, two wives. Shem ha'achath Ghada, and the name of the first one was Ghada. Washem Hashenith Sila. Sila was the name of the second one, it says. Wateled Ghada eth Yaval, and Ghada, she gave birth to Yaval. Hu haya avi Yoshev ohel umiqneh, that he was literally the father of those who settle in tents. And miqneh has a couple different possible meanings. One is that he or that they sort of take care of cattle or livestock. They tend livestock. Another possibility is that he was the father of those who live in tents and make acquisitions. This is a wealth building game, apparently. Yaval was apparently the very first Jew. I'm joking. Somebody is going to be angry that I said that. I can't believe you made a Jew joke. Well, I'm a Jew. I can say what I want about us. Leave me alone. Verse 21. Ushem Achil Yuval, and the name of his brother was Yuval. Hu haya avi kal tofes Kinor. Sorry, that's one of those letters that has two pronunciations. Kinor ve'ogav. So he was the father. Yuval was the father, it says, of those who play the harp and ogav, like the flutes, like a flute instrument. Obviously, it's probably not going to be a flute in the sense that we're aware of today, except for maybe like a recorder, one of those instruments that was very clearly early on because nobody can stand it. Somebody is going to be very upset that I said that. Verse 22. Wasila gamhi yalda et tuvokain. And Sila, the second wife of Lamech, she also gave birth to Tuvokain. Lotesh Kalhoresh Nahosheth. And it's just, I only laugh because here's the same word that we get Nahash from. Uvarzel, that he was the so Tuvokain, he sharpened cutting implements, cutting like knives, swords, that sort of a thing, of copper and iron. Wahoth Tuvokain Naama, and the sister of Tuvokain was Naama. Now, that is all very interesting. If you didn't pick up on it, what I was talking about going on after verse 17 here is there's a genealogy, and you're going to find a lot of that in the book of Genesis. There's this one here, then there's in the next chapter there's actually a lot. We are not finishing this chapter this week. We are only reading a small portion. We're going to save the next 4 verses for next week because there's a lot there to unpack. So, verse 17. Start at the beginning, right? Verse 17. So, I mentioned earlier that there were 2 possible translations of it, and with those 2 translations comes 2 possible interpretations of it. So the one, the more traditional one that I read, or that I translated it that way earlier, says that Qaim, he leaves. It also happens to be that this is where we're going to see Qaim's redemption. We're going to see him come back from his exile. And, I'll just go ahead and say, the man has a family. Not only does he have a family, but his family goes on to have a family. His son has a child. There are cities being built here. God exiled Cain from humanity because he couldn't play well with others, to say it, very, very kindly. It's the equivalent of putting him in timeout and saying that you sit there until you can play nice with others. And Cain, after a while, we don't know how long, reached a point where he controlled his temper and he was able to, at the very least, tolerate people. Poor guy has got a bad reputation just for, being what every single human being is. He's screwed up, okay, we get it. Then you gotta give him a way out, fix yourself. He finally did. And now he's coming back. And it's beautiful, I think. It really sort of closes the whole thing. But that's not where Qaim's importance ends. It goes on. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. And hopefully, if I remember at the end, we're going to talk about who his most famous descendant was. We'll get to that when we get to that. If we there you have it. What was I even saying? What are my notes? Okay, yeah, so first possible interpretation, or first possible translation of verse 17 is that Qayyim, he gets married. We don't know if the marriage happened before or after his exile. I like to think that it happened after his exile, because that really just sort of, to me in my mind, it just kind of makes for a nice romance, side story. You get this lonely wanderer who meets a small town girl, and it's all very Hallmark, right? So that would make a great movie if Hallmark would just get a second plot line. I'm a bad person. Anyway, as I was saying, so first possible translation and interpretation: Cain gets married, has a son named Hanoch, and he builds a city. Again, going back to civilization, he builds a city, and he names the city after Hanoch. Now, where is this city? It's the very first question that most people, who are looking for something a little bit more from the text would ask. Where is this city? I would like to see this city. I would love to visit. And odds are you probably would not, given the fact that it's destroyed long time ago. If this interpretation of the text is true, if the traditional interpretation of the text is true, we could argue very convincingly that the city that was founded and named for Hanoch is actually the city of Unug. Unug it's a Sumerian city. It's long since destroyed. It's long since abandoned. I say long since. It was abandoned right around the same time that the Muslim army started heading that way. Now, we don't know if it was because they were being invaded by Muslims from Saudi Arabia, but we do know that it was right around the same time that the Muslims entered that area. The city of Unug was just sort of abandoned. Now, Unug has another name that was given later on by the Akkadians, after the Akkadians conquered the area, and that name was Uruk, right? Big difference between on the one you've got Unug, and here you have Uruk. Totally different, don't even sound the same, right? Well, maybe. So, some biblical scholars actually make a connection. I think this is a pretty solid connection between the Akkadian translation here, or the Akkadian, not translation, transliteration, their version of the name of this city, and the biblical city of Erech, which we're going to get into not this week or next week, but here in quite a few chapters, when we start talking about Nimrod. The Torah lists it as the second city of Nimrod, right? So that's fun. We'll maybe get back into this discussion about that city when we get there. This city dates back to approximately 5,000 years BCE. Okay, so that is around, just for argument's sake, for just give you a ballpark area, that is around 7,025-ish years ago that it was founded. Okay, the second possible translation of verse 17 goes like this: Cain knew his wife, and they had a son, Hanoch. Okay, so Hanoch goes on to have a son named Irad, and Hanoch is the one who builds this city and names it after his son Irad. Full disclosure, I favor this translation, though both certainly do have their merits. Okay, if that's the case, Irad is very, very similar to the name of what is known as being the oldest city in the region, possibly in the world. And it also, coincidentally, happens to have been inhabited right up until, in terms of, geological age, fairly recently. We're talking about roughly about 500 BCE. Okay, so that's when it was abandoned. The name of this city is Eridu. Okay, Eridu sounds very, very similar to Riyadh. For sure, they have the same etymology. Okay, what we don't know is, and it does date back about 500 years or so before the city of Unug, right? So, I mean, not that I'm expecting, any of you to know that offhand. Oh yeah, I'm a professor of Sumerian archaeology, and yes, I know this, yes. It predates the city of Unug by about 500 years, so that puts it back about 5500 BCE. So that's roughly, we'll just use nice round numbers here. That's roughly 7500 years ago. Okay. The city of Eridu has another name, and this is not going to be important here, but it will come into play right around the same time we start talking about Nimrod, actually. The second name of this city is Nunki. Ki being the like a place name marker, so you could actually say that this is the city of Nun. Okay. Now that's going to come into play once we get to the incident of the Tower of Babel. Okay, we're not getting into that today because that doesn't come along until I think it's chapter 11, 10 or 11. I think it's 10 actually. Now that I'm thinking about it, or perhaps the early part of 11. But we're not going to quote me on that because, frankly, I haven't read it in almost a year. So we're almost upon it again in the weekly Torah cycle. Or the annual weekly Torah cycle. I don't know how to say that. We read through the entire Torah over the course of a year. I don't know how you would say that in English. But I digress, and let me take a look at my notes here. So both of these are going to be in modern-day Iraq. Both of these cities are in modern-day Iraq, and they're actually separated by, let's say less than roughly 200 kilometers or so. They're fairly close to each other because people, let's face it, didn't really get around very much until relatively recently. Okay. Now, with the traditional understanding of it, the traditional translation and understanding of it, there is a midrashic work, or what appears to be a midrashic work, called the Book of Jubilees. It's non-canonical. Some of you may have heard it. It's a very interesting book. And it actually takes the side of the first translation. It specifically says that it was Cain that founded the city as opposed to his son Hanoch. Not relevant, but is relevant because it's not really important who founded the city. I just think that it's really interesting that we come to a sort of a point where we have two possibilities, and both of them actually do produce really good possibilities, and frankly, I think that helps to strengthen the Torah's case. I think that whether you believe that these are literal physical historical figures, or if you believe that these are metaphors, the story is true. I mean, it's the evidence is right there. Now, one more thing that I wanted to look at, and I'm sure everybody loves going over genealogies, but I would love to look at the genealogy of Cain. One of the reasons that we know that he improved himself, that he eventually repented and eventually was welcomed back into society, is that the Torah actually goes to great details to mention his genealogy. Okay. Now I will tell you his most famous descendant. I'm going to do that now so that I don't forget later. So his most famous descendant, at least if you're a Jew, is a man who has 7 names according to the Talmud. The most common one, or the most well-known one, would be Yithro, okay? Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, who lived originally in Midian, but it specifically calls him Yithro HaKini, Jethro the Canaanite, if that's a word. Okay. It could also mean that he was a smith, because again, Cain means smith. Okay. Let's get into the genealogies here, right? So we read all the way down through, and I'm not going to get into the earlier part of that genealogy. I probably will discuss it once we get to where we're talking about Seth, because some of the names from Seth's line are very close, and in at least one notable case, 2 notable cases actually, identical to the names in Cain's line, right? So we just very quickly, I'm going to read you again. So Cain, he has a son that he calls Hanoch. Hanoch, just for reference here, means founder. I just think that that's really cool. Do I think that his dad called him founder? No, probably not. Okay, most of the names, at least in the book of Genesis, do appear to be more descriptive than this is literally what they were called. But this is how we remember them. This is what's important to God that we remember them by. So Cain, a smith, who, according to, I was just reading in the Midrash over Shabbat, that Cain was he was a smith, but he didn't use fire, right? He just like beat copper, like he beat softer metals. It wasn't until later on that the forge was invented, and we're actually going to get into that today. So it goes to Cain, then Hanoch, and then Hanoch has a son called Ayarad. Ayarad has a son called Mehuyael. Then Mehuyael has a son called Methushael, and Methushael has a son called Lemech, or Lamech. Lamech is the very first case of openly mentioned polygamy in the Torah. There are traditions, and I believe I mentioned this before, that Adam actually had multiple wives. One, Hawa, Eve, that everybody knows, and at least one that is, known only to those of us who keep up with this sort of thing, who was perhaps called Lilith. I do think it's interesting. I still find it just fascinating that later tradition actually goes so far as to say that Lilith became a demon. And I think that is hysterical, because isn't that how all marriages end? Both sides start to think of the other one as a little bit possessed. Let's be honest about that, okay? I can't stand this person. The devil's got them or something, I don't know what they say. I've never been divorced, thank God. But so Lamech, he has 2 wives. He has one called Ada and one called Silah, right? So Ada has 2 children. She has Yaval and Yuval. And then Silah, she has 2 children as well, Tuval-Cain and Naamah. Naamah is the sister of Tuval-Cain. It's important to us to remember that, because for whatever reason the Torah tells us that. It specifies she was his sister. Presumably because there was a tradition about her that was known in the ancient times, that perhaps she was, some big shot at something. And we're actually going to talk about that So Yaval, and I'm leaving my glasses on because I am going to be referring to my notes. So Yaval is an interesting character, right? So his name, well, let's start with this. So he was credited as the father of people who live in tents and who either acquire things or, which sounds frankly kind of science fiction-y, he's an acquirer. You know, it's just, I don't know, man. I like science fiction. I just think that it reminds me of something that I heard one time in the television series Andromeda, actually, with the Collectors, if any of you are familiar with that. So he either lived in tents and acquired things, or he lived in tents and kept livestock, right? Now, Yaval, his name means something along the lines of a leader, by extension. Okay, literally it means like someone who like brings forth something that like a bringer or something like that. So leader kind of goes with it. He may very well have been the literal ancestor of these people with this lifestyle, or he may have been just the first one, and others were like, that seems really sort of interesting. I think I want to do that too. And we're not really told what exactly. Somebody's vehicle is very loud, and I apologize if you can hear that. We're not really told exactly what about his society would have been so attractive, except that perhaps we're talking about the acquisition of material wealth. And there are actually some midrashim that attribute materialism to him. So not necessarily a good thing, but it is a good thing in the development of humanity, right? So some rabbis, like Rabbi Avraham ben Meir ibn Ezra, he sees this as a more of a technological and social advancement in human history. He sees this as being the birth of economy, if you will. These people were basically semi-nomadic pastoralists. Okay, these are like Bedouins today. Okay, they're shepherds, and they just sort of wander their flocks all over the place. Now it's interesting that is exactly Jethro's profession. You read the book of Exodus, it's going to tell you that Moses was also kind of got adopted into the family when he married Zipporah, so he also became a shepherd, a nomadic shepherd, sort of a Bedouin type person, wandering from place to place with these flocks of his father-in-law. Very interesting that the Torah actually tells us that was his that was Jethro's profession. In addition to being a Kohen, which can mean either a priest, in this case he would have been an idolatrous priest, or it could also mean like a government official. The word itself means minister, Kohen. It means minister. It can refer to minister in the religious sense or minister in the governmental sense. So those of you who live in countries where you have governmental ministers, okay, so that's wonderful. In the US we don't have that. But those of you who are living in countries like that, okay, so you understand minister doesn't always mean like the preacher at the local Baptist church, right? Or in the case of, if you're Jewish, the Mr. Cohen at the at the Chabad down the street, So we're going to move on from Yaval. Now Yuval, his brother, their names actually, they sound similar, right? Well, it's because they come from the same root, right? They both mean bringing forth something. In this case, Yuval is a little bit closer to something like a running stream, or like a running spring, a babbling brook, if you will, to be more poetic about it. He's credited as being the father of people of musicians who were skilled in harps and pipes, and frankly, I think that that's hilarious because that means that I get to blame him for bagpipes. Okay, if you've heard bagpipes, you know what I'm talking about when I say blame him. Okay, if you've never heard bagpipes, okay, so you're lucky. It's not a particularly, it's an acquired listening style. It is a, it does have its place, and there are times I've been to some funerals, military funerals, where bagpipes are playing, some song or another, and it's beautiful. It's very moving. I was in the U.S. Air Force. I've even heard the Air Force song, which I guess you could call the anthem of the Air Force. I've even heard that played on bagpipes, and that was actually kind of cool, because I didn't know that you could play anything other than Amazing Grace and Scotland the Brave on bagpipes, so that was pretty cool. Scotland the Brave just belongs on bagpipes, okay? Let's be honest about that, right? So Yuval, he's credited as being the father of these musicians. Was he their literal father, or was he just the first one to develop these instruments? Well, probably the second one, but, we can't discount the fact that he probably also taught his children music, or at least how to make music. So there are some midrashim that comment that he used to use his music for idolatry, which, it is what it is, okay? That was, at the time, everybody was an idolater, basically, right? I mean, you still had people who worshipped Hashem, but the overwhelming majority of the world was, into either their gods or their spirits, or whatever the case may have been. So to say that he used his music for idolatry, well, that's not necessarily a black mark against him. It can be, but it's not necessarily one. Okay, it doesn't have to be. One of the things that it also does is that shows us that this is the technological development of music, right? Music is, it's one of those things that I enjoy very much. I'm always listening to music. I'll listen to just about any kind of music, except for very, very few different genres, because they just, they don't appeal to me. They seem very hollow. Like a lot of what's out there in rap, R&B, that sort of thing. It seems very hollow to me. I think it's a very powerful and a very beautiful form of music, but the message that most artists are putting out it's very hollow. That's all I'm going to comment about that sort of music. Okay, so technologically speaking, music, archaeologists will tell you, was originally a religious thing. So it makes perfect sense that we're going to see that the very first musician perhaps played his music for idolatrous purposes. That's just a no-brainer, okay? Tuval Cain. The man's name literally means smith, or it could also mean Cain Smith, which I think is just silly. So, why is he called Smith twice? Okay, so Cain, the son of Eve, was a smith in the more traditional sense. Okay, he would beat hammer into certain, or beat not hammer. Well, I guess he would technically do that too. He would using perhaps a wooden mallet, beat softer metals into whatever he needed them for. Perhaps bowls, perhaps plates, perhaps something for maybe cutting up food or something, like a knife or something like that. Small things that were very delicate. So perhaps even jewelry. Because remember, these are metals that you don't have to put through a forge in order for them to be manipulated, right? Tuval Cain is the exact opposite. He takes, according to all the commentaries about him, according to every single midrash about him, he took what Cain made, this art of smithery, and he increased it. He seasoned it, is the words that at least one rabbi uses. He seasoned it. what that's interpreted to mean traditionally is that he invented the forge. Tubal-Cain invents the forge, and he's now able to smelt these metals. He's able to work them a little bit better, and he can now smelt harder metals. And he uses that, we're told, to make cutting implements, which includes weapons of warcraft. Okay. Now, this is also going to hint at a technological advancement. Okay, we're going to get into that in just a minute. These are all very important things that we're talking about, so I hope the sound of loud vehicles behind me doesn't interfere. Now, Tubal-Cain, as it happens, actually has a very similar name to another famous forger, if that's a word, in history. Particularly in Roman history. The Romans had a god of the forge whose name was Vulcan. Okay? If you're familiar with Star Trek, yes, that is Spock's home planet. The interesting thing about Vulcan and Tubal-Cain is that their names and their professions are very similar to each other. Vulcan appears to be perhaps an Indo-European corruption of a Semitic original Tubal-Cain. You know, you take off that 2 at the beginning, you're left with Vulcain, which can easily be seen to develop into Vulcan. So I just think that that's cool. So there appears to have been some connection between the two. One of the rabbis who taught me is of the opinion that it's the same person, that Vulcan represents a deified version of Tubal-Cain, and that may very well be the case, and I really honestly would not put it past the ancients, especially in light of what we're going to get into, not in chapter 5, but at the beginning of chapter 6. And that's going to be a fun one, because we're going to talk about aliens. Just kidding. Well, yes and no. I'm kind of kidding with that. Kind of. Right, so let's move on. So finally we're going to get into Lamech's daughter. Her name was Naamah. Now, Naamah means like pleasant or lovely. Okay, she's perhaps very pretty to look at, but the Midrashim are quick to point out that she used, or that she was the first to sing accompaniment to music. So she was the first, let's call her the first of what we would consider to be a singer, right? She had a pleasant voice. She had a lovely voice. Now, some Midrashim say that she did it for idolatry, which also makes sense for the same reason that Yuval's music makes sense to have been originally for idolatry. Others say, no, she was just a singer, man. Come on, not everything's about idolatry. Although it really was back in the day, but that's not important. We're not going to talk about that. Okay, so what we can see going on, oh, and there's also, here's just kind of a fun side thought, there's also a tradition that the wife of Noah was named Naamah. So some rabbis are of the opinion that it's the same Naamah. Others are of the opinion that no, it's two different women named Naamah. Now, how common could the name have been? I don't know. But again, we're talking about names that are not necessarily names as much as they are descriptions of the people. So what is clear from the professions of Lamech's children is that their professions represent human development. Their professions represent the technological advancements in society. Okay, regardless of what they used their music for or what. Okay, what's clear is Yuval does represent economical advancement. Okay, the development of an economy, a solid economy. Okay, Yuval represents cultural advancement, the development of music. So Tubal-Cain, he represents technological advancement, the ability to manipulate metal and do all sorts of metal work, really propelled humanity into a new age. We'll call it a copper age because a golden age would imply something greater, but we'll call this one a copper age, okay? And then you have Na'amah, who represents really the advancement of human aesthetics. We like to, in addition to having things that work, we also like for them to look good. Okay, we like for them to be aesthetically pleasing. So I want to emphasize all of that. Let me close my Torah here. I want to emphasize all of that as being important to us because the Torah mentions their names for a reason. And I think that one of those reasons is not who they were and what they did. I think that what is most important to remember about them is these are all descendants of Cain, which goes to show us he repented. He didn't just find a wife for himself, he found a wife for his son. He lived to see, God knows how many grandchildren, great-grandchildren. There's no telling how long the man lived, okay, or how long his descendants lived, okay. What is interesting to note is that his descendants made amazing advancements. And the Torah wants us to remember them for that. The Torah wants us to remember Cain, this exiled manslaughterer. I don't even know how you'd say that. This man who accidentally killed his brother, and wants us to remember him as being, yes, he did do some bad stuff, but look at what happened as a result of his exile and his reconciliation and his, once he repented, look at what his people were able to accomplish. We developed the ability to smelt metals. We developed music. We developed singing. Okay, we developed aesthetic beauty. We developed these semi-nomadic pastoralist lifestyle, this Bedouin style of living. These are all major advancements at the time. The Torah wants us to know it was Cain who gave us that. It wasn't anybody else. It could have come through someone who the Torah calls righteous. Noah, for example, the Torah calls him righteous in his day. And then goes on to tell us that he sinned pretty badly. He did a couple of things that really righteous men shouldn't do, right? But when it comes to Cain, we learn first of his faults and then how he overcame them. And then we're introduced to his descendants who did wonderful things, who did amazing things. Yes, the things that they did have the ability, or the potential, I should say, to be used for destruction. They did have the potential to be used for, if you want to go Star Wars on it, to be used for the dark side. Darth Vader's breathing apparatus in my head. But. We started with a Cain who was not the best person, but he got better. Which sounds like a Monty Python joke. He got better, and then he taught his children better. And they taught theirs, and so on and so forth, until now you have 4 major technological breakthroughs being credited not just to Cain's descendants, but to Cain himself. And that, I think, is one of the most important messages that the Torah has to say. Yes, you can screw up very badly, but as the Book of Proverbs tells us, if you screw up, it tells us the righteous man, he falls 7 times, but he gets right back up. Just because you mess up doesn't necessarily mean that it's the end of it all. You can come back from it. And not only that, you can teach your children to be better than you were. And I hope that last part of that you can teach your children to be better than you, really resonates with all of you who have kids, because it resonates with me. So that being said, I'm done. I'm not going to talk anymore about this in this video. Perhaps next video we'll get into, you know, something else involving Lemech and Chaim, and there's a little bit of a teaser for you, okay? So, if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and hit the like button. Feel free to share this video on the social media platform of your choice, or you know, through text or email, or however it is that you share these things. Even if you're just holding your phone and you're like, hey dude, check out this video, and you stand there for the next hour holding your phone for him, whatever the case may be, you know, no judgment. If you're not already subscribed to this channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Go ahead and turn the notifications for this channel on, so that every time I put out a new video, you get to see it. If you're on Facebook, that's great, so am I. Come find me. Just type into the search bar an Unorthodox Jew, and you know, like and or follow the page, whatever is easiest for you. I just discovered this past week that there is an option to like it and another option to follow it. So I don't know, whichever is easiest for you to find. Okay. If you like the stuff that you see, you can feel free to comment in the comment section here on YouTube or on the Facebook page. Obviously, sharing is caring, so feel free to share any of my content. If you just want to leave a comment, that's fine. I like comments. If you have a question, that's great too. I like questions. Questions are wonderful. I'm actually working on a new group of videos that's going to address some questions. They'll probably come out in the middle of the week, so maybe not this week, but you know, eventually, once I get around to actually doing it. Things have been busy with the newborn baby and all. So, oh yeah. So if you you know, if you have a question for me, go ahead and ask the question. You can either ask in the comments, or if you go to Facebook, you can send me a private message if you don't want it to be known that you're the one asking, because a lot of times people ask questions that you know, are, let's say, inappropriate for a broader audience. Okay, they're the type of questions that you know, you should really ask in a one-on-one setting. So if that's you, great, wonderful. Send me a message. That's all I got for today. So until next time, shalom.